Am I a dreamy man because I dream too much?
Yes.
I turned and immediately began running, subconsciously throwing the apple I had just bitten, but it had already faded from existence before it ever reached the ground. Floods of emotions rushed through my veins, and they made their way out of me in the form of tears streaming down my face. This place, I don't know what it is. It feels completely unreal, yet here I am, running through the orchard, running past various types of fruit-bearing trees that aren't arranged in any particular order. That's not what feels unreal, though. What feels unreal is the almost glowing apples, oranges, pears, pomegranates, and more, and whatever is inside of them. I don't know if it's some chemical compound growing inside of them, or if it's something supernatural, but whatever it is, it has changed me. I can't believe the things I've just experienced after eating some of the fruits growing here, but I've also never experienced anything so real and convincing in my entire life. What matters now more than anything else, though, is getting home to my wife. Life can be unpredictable, and if there's one thing I've learned from coming here, it's that you have to make every moment count, and that there's always more than one side to every story. With the dirt and twigs crunching under my feet, I continue to sprint through the misty orchard and fading sunlight toward my truck. Finally, I can see the old wooden gate at the entrance, with my truck just beyond that, and I exhale in relief. This orchard gives me such strange and uneasy feelings, and it totally makes sense after what I've just experienced. Despite this feeling, however, I stop running just before I reach the driver's side door of my truck, and I turn around to look at the entrance again. As crazy as it sounds, I want to go back and grab a couple of these fruits to bring home with me so I can share this discovery and make sure I'm not crazy. When I turn around, however, I gasp in surprise. What the? No way! I shout in surprise. There is no wooden gate there anymore. It's just a bunch of overgrown brush that is blocking the dirt path which led into the orchard I had just run out of. But how can this be? I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. I literally just sprinted out of this orchard to my truck. It was just here. And I can even still feel the beads of sweat rolling down the side of my face from running through the humidity of the mist in the orchard. Without taking time to try and wrap my head around whatever is happening here, I turn back around and get in my truck. I turn the keys and hear the engine rev briefly as it starts up. Then, I throw it in reverse and peel out on the dirt before whipping the truck around to start racing back toward the highway. I'd like to tell you about what I just experienced in this mysterious orchard, but in order for it to make sense, you should know everything from the beginning, before I ever came to this strange and mysterious orchard. I'd like to say it all started when I found out that I was being laid off from my job at the factory, but truthfully, it started several months before that. You see, a couple of years ago, my wife Alina and I bought a nice ranch house out in the country, away from the city where we could have peace and quiet and own plenty of land. The house we bought wasn't in the greatest condition, though, which is why we got such a good deal on it, and we made an offer right away. The important part of the purchase was the location of the house and the land that came with it. So we looked at the rundown house as our project, which we could fix up and build into our dream home. We knew it was going to take a lot of time and effort to fix up, and naturally, also a lot of money for the tools and materials. But at that time, I was still earning plenty of money, so we weren't too worried about it. Unfortunately, the economy began to take a turn for the worse, and my once cushy job at the factory suddenly took a significant pay cut. Besides that pay cut, it also left me in a precarious position, always wondering and worrying about whether or not I'd still have a job the next day. I was able to keep my position for quite some time, thankfully, but the pay cut seriously damaged both mine and my wife's dreams, as well as our relationship. Things kept breaking around the house, but we couldn't afford to fix them faster than they were falling apart, making every little thing around the house a constant reminder of our misery and contributed to my feeling like a failure. It's astounding how much feeling like a failure can completely devastate a man's morale and confidence, even when it's out of his control. I could hardly take it as time went on, and Alina and I had started arguing about bills and what needed to be fixed first. It got to the point that I began dreading coming home after work, because I knew as soon as I walked in the door, I would be reminded of our decaying dream house and disintegrating marriage. What I really couldn't understand, though, was why my wife kept asking again and again about the bills and what needed to be fixed and what we were going to do about it. She knew how much stress I was under at work, and she knew just as well as I did that we couldn't afford to fix up our house like we originally dreamed about together. Why couldn't she also understand how much those questions dug into me and bored holes into my soul and masculinity? I couldn't help but feel like sometimes she was purposefully digging into me with these questions, and it made it really easy for me to snap and lose my temper. I remember coming home one day, and as soon as I walked in the door, I heard, "The toilet's broken. Can you please fix it? If we don't fix it right away, it's going to get nasty quickly. It should be an easy fix. We just need to go buy a new chain." "Seriously? Nice to see you too." "Ugh! You know how much gas costs now, and the truck gets horrible gas mileage. We'd have to drive 30 minutes all the way back into town, not to mention the 30 minutes all the way back home after," I responded curtly, without thinking. "I know you've had a long day at work. I'm sorry for coming straight at you with that. I'm stressed too, okay? This affects both of us, and I'm just trying to keep up with everything that needs to be fixed and what's most important to fix first," she replied meekly. For some reason, it drove me over the edge, and I walked back outside, slamming the door behind me, not saying a word. That's just one example, but there have been many occasions like that. It ate me up inside, and I knew something had to change, but there weren't many jobs out here. At least not anymore, because of the economy. So I had to make do with what work I still had at the factory. Things continued on for a little while, and although times were tough, I did still find enjoyment in the drive to and from work, despite the fact that I knew my truck was consuming large amounts of increasingly expensive fuel. In the mornings, I'd crank up the volume to some of my favorite rock songs and drum along to the beat on the steering wheel, occasionally taking a sip of coffee from my thermos, and then letting my left arm hang outside the window in the cool air rushing by. The highway to the city, and also to my job, was long and winding. It weaved between many large rolling hills covered with large catalpa trees, and in the springtime, their blooming white flowers made the drive almost surreal with beauty, and their scent coming in through the open window permanently etched itself into my memory. Here and there, you could see roads branching off from the highway, leading to other houses and properties somewhere in the hills. But there was always this one unusual dirt path that went back between some hills that I always found peculiar. I told myself I'd take a cruise down that path one day, just to see where it goes, but I never seemed to have the time. In the afternoons, once I'd finished working for the day, I'd cruise back down the same winding highway, admiring the beauty of the hills and trees while listening to some of my favorite podcasts and stories. On my way home, I always thought I'd finally go explore down that dirt path, but every time I got close to it, I'd remind myself that there were too many things needing to be done at home and that Alina was waiting for me. Besides, it's always better to do something fun like that with a partner anyway. So I figured maybe one weekend we could take a drive together and go on an adventure to see where that path takes us. Too bad gas was so expensive though, because every time the weekend was here, we would decide against going out to try and save money on gas. Needless to say, it was yet another dream that was tossed into the fire to smolder and slowly fade away as the flames of our harsh new reality consumed it, bit by bit. That's why, when that fateful day came and I walked into my boss's office to hear the news that I'd been laid off, I lost it. I had been working on the line when Jay came up to me and motioned for me to take off my ear protection so he could talk to me. Once I'd removed my ear protection, he said, "Hey, Mitch, Chuck needs to see you in his office for a minute." For a moment, I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of what my boss needed to talk to me about in his office. But Jay was always good at keeping a straight face. Everyone used to hate playing poker with him on our Fun Friday evenings, but they hated it with a passion, because the guys would always look forward to trying to see and who could beat Jay, if any of them could beat Jay, and they'd all bet on it. Not like we've had any Fun Friday poker matches after work the past couple of months, though. Nobody could afford to play now. And besides, we were all pretty demoralized after Ricky, Jim, and Ben all got laid off. It was this exact reason why I suspiciously eyed Jay. I knew many people had been laid off recently. And now that I was being called in to talk to Chuck in his office, I was reminded of my precarious position here in the factory. Can it wait? I've still got at least 3 more batches to inspect and then pack, and I'm trying to get home at a decent time. I tactfully tried prodding Jay for more information to see how serious this conversation was that Chuck needed to have with me, but Jay's response didn't inspire any confidence in me. "It's all good, I'll handle it. Chuck's waiting for you right now. I'm sure you'll still be able to get home at a decent time." I stood there for a few more moments, trying to prolong the inevitable, as if it would just go away by me not going to Chuck's office and talking with him. That's not how life works, though, so I exhaled and said, "Yeah, alright, thanks, Jay. See you later, man." Then went to hang up my ear protection and goggles. "See you later. And hey, Mitch, take care of yourself, alright?" I stopped walking briefly as I let that statement sink in, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around and face Jay, or even respond. I just turned my head slightly to the right, gave a brief nod, and then continued walking. Making my way up the metal stairs to his office on the second floor, which overlooked the factory, felt like a death march. And I guess it was, in a way. I knocked on the door and heard him say, "Come in," in his gruff voice. Chuck was a short man with a huge beer belly, hairy arms, and fat, stubby fingers, several of which sported thick gold rings. His bushy, dark brown mustache had a sprinkling of white hairs, and he had given up on his hair a while ago, opting to keep it shaved. But the stubble was still clearly visible on the sides of his head, while the top was completely hair-free. When you combined his features with his outfit, which was a too small, white, short-sleeve button-up shirt with coffee stains near the top of his stomach and a plain black tie he would use to try and cover them up with, he clearly seemed like that quintessential boss that nobody wants to have any interactions with. "Hey, Chuck, how's it going?" I timidly asked as I walked to the chair in front of his desk and sat down. He leaned forward, putting his elbows on top of the papers spread across his desk, and interlaced his stubby gold ring-laden fingers together.
"Look, Mitch, I'm going to get straight to the point, because you and I both know things aren't going well these days for anyone. It's nothing personal, and it has nothing to do with your performance, but I've got to let you go. The factory's barely hanging on by a thread right now. We're just hoping to survive this economic recession, so hopefully it'll still be around whenever things pick back up again. My bosses are doing another round of layoffs to try and balance the numbers, and unfortunately, you've fallen on that list."
I could feel the rage boiling up inside of me as I envisioned myself reaching across the desk to grab his tie and yank his face down onto the desk over and over again. Instead, I felt the words escape my lips as I shouted, "That's bullshit and you know it, Chuck. I've worked here for 6 years already, and I can work the line better than anyone else out there. You would know that if you ever actually came down to the line once in a while, instead of hiding up here in your office. What am I supposed to do now, huh? Never mind. You don't care as long as your position is safe." In a placating tone that only further aggravated me, Chuck made a feeble attempt to shift the blame off of himself and said,
"I don't like this just as much as you, but times are tough and I've got to do what I'm told. I'm sorry. You can leave your company-issued gear downstairs and we'll mail your final check to you."
Before I really lost my temper and did something I would seriously regret, I shot up and stomped angrily out of his office without saying another word, slamming the door behind me and causing the workers on the line to look up at me as I quickly stepped down the stairs. I could tell Jay wanted to come talk to me, maybe even to try and tell me how sorry he is or how bad he feels, but I was fuming, and I didn't want to hear anything from anyone. I quickly threw down my gear, grabbed my truck keys, and hurried out to my truck. Sitting there in the parking lot, I tried taking some deep breaths to calm myself down, but of course it didn't work, and instead I shouted and punched my steering wheel. Unsurprisingly, that didn't help either, and I gently shook my throbbing knuckles back and forth to ease the stinging I could feel after punching the hard steering wheel. I didn't know what to do. The long and winding drive home that I used to enjoy now seemed like a daunting challenge, as I knew it would be a long 30 minutes alone with my thoughts and emotions, which I honestly didn't know if I could handle right now. After another few minutes, I decided I might as well start the drive home, because the longer I sat in the parking lot of the factory, the angrier I felt, and the more I wanted to storm back inside, up to Chuck's office, and introduce his face to my knuckles instead of my steering wheel. At first, I tried putting on an episode of my favorite podcast, Scary Horror Stories by Dr. No Sleep.
Dr. No Sleep.
But I wasn't in the mood for any kind of stories, and I turned the radio off. I couldn't even enjoy the beautiful hills and trees blooming with their white flowers. There was just too much on my mind, and I had no idea what I would say to my wife when I got home. Whatever I said, I knew it was sure to cause an argument, though, and I really didn't want that, especially not after my angry outbursts at the factory. That's when I saw the peculiar dirt path coming up on my right, and without thinking, I slammed on my brakes and quickly turned onto the dirt path. I had been going fast on the highway when I turned onto the dirt path, so at first I was bouncing up and down on my seat until I slowed down a bit more so I could cruise at a little more smoothly pace over the unpaved road. I looked around, but the hills were so tall on either side of me that they were all I could see. Admittedly, it kept me intrigued, since I couldn't see what was around the corner anytime the road would curve around a hill. After what must have been at least 20 minutes, the road was still winding back and forth between the hills, further and further from any civilization. I was a bit surprised that this path was still going, especially since I hadn't seen it on any maps before, and I knew there weren't any parks or other businesses or houses out this way. Once another 10 minutes had passed, I decided I would start looking for a spot where I could turn around. I'd come back out here another time and go exploring, but it was time to start heading home now. It was getting closer to when Alina would be expecting me to come home, and as much as I wanted to avoid having to tell her about losing my job and getting into another argument, I also didn't want to make her worry, which wouldn't help the situation when I did tell her the news. Suddenly, I came around the corner of another large hill into a valley, and the dirt path led right up to an old wooden gate with a faded sign nailed to it and a rusted chain and lock keeping the gate shut. I could clearly see beyond the gate that there was a mysterious orchard of mismatched trees and a thick mist hanging between them. The mist was so thick that I could only see a short way into the orchard, and I was unable to tell how big it was or how far back it went into the valley. "Well, this is interesting," I said to myself as I pulled up to the old wooden gate and parked my truck. After shutting the engine off, I stepped out and walked up to read the faded sign. As I got closer to the gate, I could barely make out the faded white letters that had been painted on the partially rusted and pitted black iron sign, which read, "The Orchard of Experience." The Orchard of Experience? What's that supposed to mean? What a strange name for an orchard. It is pretty weird that it would be tucked so far back into this valley, though. I'd imagine that the hills would prevent enough sunlight from reaching the trees, I wondered aloud. As I peeked around the side of the gate to get a closer look at the trees, though, it was apparent that the trees were doing just fine. In fact, they all seemed to be practically covered in the biggest and ripest looking fruits I had ever seen. Gazing around at a handful of the trees closest to me that hadn't been completely enveloped and hidden by the thick mist, I could see that there were several kinds of fruit growing on them. I could see mostly red and green apples, but there were also numerous oranges, pears, pomegranates, cherries, and more. The fact that this variety of different fruits were all growing on the same trees struck me as odd, and I couldn't recall ever seeing anything like it before. Sure, I'd heard of grafting before, but even with my limited knowledge on the subject, I knew that grafting could only occur within the same species. You couldn't graft an apple tree to a pear tree, for example, but these trees didn't even look like they were grafted. No, they clearly looked as if they had grown this way naturally and began to produce a variety of different fruits. There was one other thing that really caught my attention, though. As I looked at each different kind of fruit growing on the trees, they not only looked larger than usual and perfectly ripe, but they also emitted a kind of vibration. Not the kind of vibration you can hear or feel, though. It was more like they were almost vibrating in a way that made them brighter and clearer, like they were calling to me and showing me how delicious and juicy they are. I stepped back away from the gate and quickly scanned the valley around me, checking for any kind of house, building, cameras, or any indication of who owned this strange and mysterious orchard. When I couldn't seem to find anything, I turned and faced the gate again, looking down at the rusty chain and lock, keeping it closed. I picked up the lock and squeezed down on the top of it, just to confirm that it was locked, but to my surprise, it clicked open with hardly any effort. Huh. Okay, I quietly said to myself, feeling a bit uneasy at how unusual this whole situation was. After taking another look around the gate and fence to either side, I couldn't find any signs that said, "No trespassing," or "Private property." So I decided I'd at least go inside to get a closer look at these bizarre trees that were unlike anything I'd ever seen or heard of before. I pulled the chain out from the two boards it had been wrapped around and placed it neatly off to the left side. For some reason, as I put my hands up on either side of the fence, preparing to push both sides open and walk through the middle, I felt an eerie sense of power emanating from the orchard. It was as if there was some field of invisible energy just on the other side of the gate. The fact that the thick mist was hanging in the air, not crossing the threshold of the fence or the gate, added to this eerie field of power and vibrance that I could feel. For the briefest of moments, I wondered if I should even be doing this, or if I should just start heading home. As soon as that thought entered my mind, however, sudden flashbacks of my outburst in Chuck's office and punching my steering wheel in the parking lot reminded me of the frustration awaiting me when I would arrive at home. I scoffed at the thought and said, "Nope, not today. I need this. I'll just be in and out, no big deal. This is just too strange to pass up." Taking in a deep breath through my nose and exhaling from my mouth, I leaned forward, putting my weight onto the gate, and it slowly swung open. I stepped forward into the orchard, and I could immediately feel the mist enveloping me. It was strange, because the mist felt warm and vibrant, and it had a strange feeling as if it were electrically charged. I could feel the hair on my arms and my neck wanting to stand up, but the mist was too thick and warm. Continuing to walk into the misty orchard toward the closest tree, I took in another deep breath through my nose to catch the scent of the trees, and I was immediately struck with a strong sense of nostalgia. This nostalgia I began feeling was quite curious, though, because usually I would be reminded of some particular memory or memories associated with it, but this was different. I guess it was almost more of a sense of déjà vu, where I felt like I'd been here before, even though I knew for sure that I had never been to this uncanny orchard. I walked up to the tree, and when I was directly underneath its branches, I could see the strange, vibrant-looking fruit. That vibration seemed much stronger now that I was up close, and as soon as my eyes landed on the delicious Alfonso mango just within my reach, I couldn't help myself. I needed to taste it. It was getting closer to dinner time by now, and I was beginning to feel hungry. Ever since I was young, I also had a proclivity for the sweet, juicy, and creamy taste of mangoes. So, as it dangled there in front of me, vibrating and calling its sweet siren song, I knew my mind was already made. I reached up and easily plucked the mango from its stem on the branch, and once I held it in my hand, the weight of it surprised me. It was about as heavy as a half-gallon of milk, and even had a slight physical vibration to it, like it was radiating power similar to the mist in the air. Wow, I whispered to myself, eyes locked on the mango as I tossed it up and down, admiring how heavy it was. Reaching into my back pocket, I pulled out the pocket knife that I always carried with me, and I started peeling off the skin. The smell hit my nostrils with a heavenly mango scent, the most incredible and delicious smelling mango I ever had in my life. My mouth began to water heavily, and I couldn't wait to peel the whole mango. Once I had removed enough skin to take a big bite, I immediately bit down into it. The sweet, creamy juices overflowed from my mouth and dribbled down into my beard, but I didn't care. I had never tasted anything so good before. It was as if this mango was the epitome of what the ideal mango should look, feel, and taste like. I moaned as I chewed the soft but still slightly fibrous mango. I took another big bite out of it and closed my eyes to savor the taste without any outside distractions. Just myself and my taste buds, reveling in the deliciously succulent euphoria. Suddenly, I began feeling strange. It was difficult to place exactly what this feeling was, though, because it was very peculiar, yet somehow familiar. I opened my eyes to pull myself away from the mango-induced ecstasy and ground myself back in the present moment so I could try to understand what I was feeling. At the very moment when I opened my eyes, however, I knew that something was terribly wrong, and I gasped in surprise. I was still standing in the orchard, but it was now dark, like the mist had thickened so much as to block out the remaining sunlight. I could still see, though, but that's what made me frightened the most. The reason I could still see is because the mango I held in my hand was glowing with a bright golden light, and it was becoming brighter and brighter so rapidly that I had to close my eyes again. Even with my eyes closed, the light seemed to penetrate my eyelids until my whole world became completely engulfed in light, and I felt all sensation of my body disappear. Whoa, I thought to myself as I held my eyes shut tightly and began to feel my body again. But wait, why do I feel so small? Just then, I felt my lungs take in a deep breath, but I wasn't the one who breathed in. It had just happened, as if someone else was in control. What the hell's going on? I shouted within my mind, beginning to freak out. I can't even begin to fully describe how strange the sensation is to completely feel your body, but for someone else to be in control of it. Just as suddenly as I had begun to freak out, though, I felt the flames of fear and anxiety become completely doused as quickly as dumping a bucket of water onto a small fire. In their place was something new, something elating and energetic. Before I could analyze these new feelings any further, my lungs quickly exhaled and my eyes opened to see a birthday cake with 5 candles lit in front of me. My head moved from side to side as I watched and felt myself blowing out the candles. That's when I realized the reason I felt so small is because I was in the body of a 5-year-old boy. And this was more than just some vision or hallucination, because I can feel everything inside of this body, including the boy's movements, thoughts, and emotions. At first, I wanted this to be some kind of memory that I was reliving in my mind, but the craziest part is that I can't even convince myself of that, because this never happened to me. I remember my 5th birthday very clearly. I had spent my birthday at the park, and I had hamburgers, chips, and cupcakes, while my friends and I chased each other and swung on the swings, seeing who could go the highest. This vision, or whatever this is that I'm experiencing, is taking place inside of a home that I don't recognize, and I don't recognize any of the adults or kids around me either. Before I could make sense of anything, everyone started clapping and saying, "Happy birthday, Eddie! Woohoo!" I felt overwhelming happiness and gratitude welling up inside of me as I looked around at everyone, grinning with the biggest smile on my face. "This is incredible! Everyone came here for me, and they're all so happy for me! They even got me the exact cake I wanted, and all of my friends were able to come! This is the best birthday ever! I'm always going to remember today! Oh, presents! Let's go open some presents now!" I could hear the thoughts in my mind as clearly and loudly as if they were my own, but I wasn't the one who thought them. I knew it was the boy, Eddie, who had been thinking those exact words and feeling so happy and excited. I don't know how it's possible, but somehow I seemed to be experiencing this boy's memories from his 5th birthday. It was amazing to feel that kind of happiness and excitement again, as the joy experienced when you're a kid is something unique and sweet. And admittedly, the older I became, the more distant that level of joy grew. Just as Eddie had scooted his chair back, picked up his piece of chocolate cake on the paper plate, and started to run off to another room in the house, wherever the presents were, I noticed that the sensation of physically moving, as well as the depth in which I was feeling his emotions, started quickly fading. Even the vision of what I was seeing as he turned around the corner into the living room faded quickly to black. I gasped loudly and then started hyperventilating as I looked around me and realized that I was standing in the misty orchard once again, half-eaten mango in my hand. The sunlight seemed to be visible again now, and as far as I could tell, everything seemed to be as it was before I ever took those bites from the mango in my hand. "What the hell?" I shouted in surprise. The mango I had been eating and holding in my hand was rapidly fading away, as if it was ceasing to exist. Honestly, it frightened me. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew that it was so far beyond the reality I was aware of that I dropped the fading mango as if it were a hot coal burning my hand. Before the mango even hit the ground, though, it was completely gone. Even the skin I had peeled off with my pocket knife and let fall to the ground before biting the mango was gone now, like it had never even existed at all. "Whoa, what is this place?" I shakily asked aloud, looking around from my left to my right. As frightening as this experience was, I knew that it was special, and I decided I wasn't going to leave quite yet. I mean, if you found a mysterious orchard like this and ate some fruit that literally placed you into the memory of someone else like you were them, wouldn't you be curious too? Well, I sure as hell was. In fact, I had completely forgotten about being laid off from the factory and letting my anger get the best of me in Chuck's office. All I wanted to do now was keep looking around this orchard. I wonder if that happens with every kind of fruit. Or maybe certain fruits relate to certain types of memories? I thought to myself, filled with wonder and brimming with curiosity. Wow, is this really happening right now? I laughed and asked myself out loud, realizing the absurdity of this situation and how crazy it would sound if I had tried explaining it to someone. I smiled and briefly shook my head, then walked a couple of paces forward and reached up to a bunch of dark red grapes hanging from another branch. Plucking one of the grapes from the bottom of the bunch and popping it into my mouth, I bit down and tasted juicy bliss as I chewed and savored the taste. I moaned again, closing my eyes. I couldn't help it. This grape was also by far the best tasting grape I had ever eaten in my entire life, and my eyes seemed to automatically close so I could focus on the delicious flavor without any outside distractions. I swallowed the grape after chewing and savoring every bit of it, but for a moment, I wondered if maybe it had just been the mango that had brought me into the strange experience of Eddie's 5th birthday, because nothing was happening. I didn't feel any changes or notice anything at first, but then I felt my stomach drop and my adrenaline spike as if I was suddenly in mortal danger. Quickly, I opened my eyes to look around and see what was causing me to feel this way. But when I did, the orchard had grown dark once again, like the mist had consumed all outside sunlight. This time, however, I had eaten the whole grape and was not holding on to anything that could shine. Yet, I could still see everything bathed in a deep red glow. I looked up and saw that the bunch of grapes which I had taken the grape from and eaten was the source of the deep red glow, emanating and flickering, similar to the way a wind chime makes fleeting noises in the wind. The shimmering red glow grew brighter and brighter, just as the glow from the mango had, until I lost all sensation once again as the light engulfed my entire being. This time, I didn't even bother closing my eyes. I knew that it wouldn't make a difference anyway. When the burning bright light began to fade, I could immediately notice that I was looking down and writing something on a yellow sticky note. But what really stood out to me was the red nail polish on my long fingernails, and the fact that I was writing with my left hand, even though I've always been right-handed. Seeing the red nail polish, long nails, and soft skin made me realize that I had somehow stepped into the memory of a woman, and I could sense that she was feeling bored. She was writing some kind of to-do list on the sticky note. That must have been what she planned to do later. I noticed a computer and monitor in front of me, slightly to the right, a locked cash drawer under the counter I was writing the to-do list on, and some kind of thick plexiglass in front of me that separated me from the open space on the other side of the desk, or counter, I was at. The computer monitor had been off or asleep, but the woman whose memory I was experiencing finished writing, then clicked the mouse to turn the screen back on. That's when I noticed the authentication sign-on screen. It was for one of the local banks we have in town. Alright. I guess she must be working at one of the local banks in town. Oh, maybe the one on 3rd Street? I thought to myself as I tried to make sense of whoever and wherever this woman was. I wonder what her name is. Who do I know with red nail polish that works at a bank? Suddenly my train of thought was cut off by the woman's thought. I can hardly take it when it's so slow. Maybe I could ask Teresa if I can leave a little bit early today. Instead of standing here twiddling my thumbs, I could at least go get some of these errands taken care of, and then have some time to myself to relax. She continued to click through some of the open spreadsheets and make an adjustment here and there, when the bell attached to the front door quickly jingled as it was opened. As she looked up and started to put a smile on her face to greet the new customer, I could suddenly feel her heart rate increase as fear rushed through her veins, and her smile quickly turned into an expression of terror. It wasn't a customer who had just entered the bank. It was a tall, burly man wearing a black balaclava, black and red checkered flannel button-up shirt, blue jeans, and black gloves that were tightly gripping the semi-automatic shotgun aimed directly at my face. A gasp and then scream involuntarily escaped from my lungs, and my hands instinctively raised above my head. There was the plexiglass between me and the robber running quickly up to my window. But in the heat of the moment, you never know what can happen, and instinct makes you react automatically. "Open the drawer and give me all your big bills, now!" the man screamed at me, raising the shotgun and lining the sight directly at my face. I couldn't help it. I was in shock and frozen in place, staring directly down the barrel of the shotgun, unable to even breathe. "Now!" he screamed at me again, this time cocking the shotgun and putting a shell into the chamber to show me he means business. Thankfully, I shakily broke out of my state of shock and whimpered quietly, Okay, I'll get it." I reached into my left pocket to pull out my set of keys, but my hands were trembling so bad that I nearly dropped them and kept fumbling with them as I tried to insert the drawer key into the lock. I could feel his eyes burning into me, pressuring me to move faster as his aggravation continued to rise. After what felt like an eternity, I got the key in the hole, turned it, and the drawer popped open. Quickly gathering up all of the biggest bills in the drawer, I started to stack them on the counter in front of the man. What the hell? Where's Dan?" she cried out in her mind. The bell attached to the front door abruptly jingled once again, causing the man to jump and turn around. It was the police!
"Freeze!"
the officer shouted, with his pistol aimed directly at the man's center mass. But before he could even finish his command, the shotgun was aimed at him. All hell had broken loose as the robber pulled the trigger of the shotgun. He had been turning around quickly, however, so his aim was slightly off as he squeezed the trigger a split second before the barrel of the shotgun had been completely aimed at the officer. The buckshot hit the officer's left shoulder, causing him to slightly twist and be pushed backward and to the right as he squeezed the trigger of his pistol. This made the bullet miss the robber entirely, and it struck the plexiglass directly in front of me, making it crack into a spiderweb shape around where the bullet impacted. I had already been ducking behind the counter, so I didn't see it happen, but the last 3 pops I heard were followed by a grunt and some groaning, indicating that the officer had recovered and been able to neutralize the robber before he got the chance to pump another shell into the shotgun's chamber. Crouched behind the counter, facing away from the plexiglass, I could see an office door slightly open. "Dan!" she exclaimed in her mind as she saw him peeking out from behind the door. He must have heard what was happening and immediately called the cops. Oh, thank God. Just then, the sensations of adrenaline, fear, the uncontrollable shaking of my body, hyperventilation, and the view of Dan peeking out from behind the door started to quickly fade to black. I gasped loudly and started hyperventilating once again. Only this time I felt nausea twist my stomach tightly. I put my shaking hands on my knees as I bent over and vomited all over the ground. Ugh, I moaned, spitting to try and get the taste out of my mouth. Whoa, that was intense. What the hell is this place? I said out loud. The humidity of the thick, warm mist was so much that after all of the adrenaline and throwing up, I could feel several beads of sweat dripping down the sides of my face. I remained bent over, just in case the nausea came back, and wiped the sweat from my face. After a moment, I felt calmed down enough to stand up, and I started walking deeper into the orchard, taking in deep breaths through my nose and exhaling out of my mouth to continue calming down. Twigs crunched under my feet as I walked and contemplated whether or not it was a good idea to try eating any more of the fruit from the trees. The sunlight is getting dimmer now, and since this orchard is tucked deep into the valley of these hills, not to mention shrouded in thick mist, I knew there wasn't much time left until dark. As curious and intrigued as I was to keep exploring, I knew this place isn't somewhere I'd want to be after dark. Finally, I decided that I would try one more fruit, but this time from another tree that was a little further into the orchard, and then it was time to go home. Just then, I saw a delicious-looking green apple tree hanging in front of me. There, that's it. I'll try this green apple and then call it quits, I thought. The apple was on a branch that was a bit higher than the mango and grapes had been, so I had to jump up and grab onto it to pluck it from the tree. Holding the shining and vibrant green apple in my hand, I rotated it and inspected it, then tossed it up and down between my hands. Like the mango had been much heavier than I expected, so too was this apple. I looked at the bright green color of the apple and admired its weight, thinking about what experiences and memories awaited me when I bit into it. I looked up and turned my head to the west, gauging the receding sunlight. Realizing that the sun was already beneath the horizon, I took in a deep breath and then bit into the apple. Just like before, I relished the heavenly sweet and sour taste of the apple, which far surpassed all other apples I'd ever tasted in my life, and my eyes once again involuntarily closed. Once I finished chewing and swallowed the bite I had taken, then opened my eyes to see the now familiar darkness in the orchard that seemed to always precede a new experience. I could see a vibrant green-tinted light emanating from the apple in my hand. This time, however, I could feel a very powerful sense of familiarity, which hadn't occurred with the mango or the grape. I had only a brief moment to consider what this meant, but then the light grew and enveloped my entire being once again. The bright green-tinted light slowly began to dim, and I was immediately struck by the sight in front of me. I was in mine and my wife's ranch house during the middle of the day. Some music was playing in the living room, and I could feel myself dancing around to it as I swept the floor and straightened things up. This wasn't me, though. Alina? I thought to myself, feeling surprised and shocked that somehow I had entered one of her memories. When it had been the boy, Eddie, and even the woman at the bank, it was fascinating and thrilling, not to mention frightening, but for some reason, now that I was viewing one of my wife's memories, it felt more invasive than anything else, like I was doing something wrong or spying on her or something. Before I could dwell on this feeling of guilt any longer, my own thoughts and feelings were drowned out by Alina's thoughts and feelings. Honestly, I don't know what I expected, but the overwhelming feelings of love flowing through me as she would glance at our photos on the wall surprised me. I had grown so accustomed to her and I fighting that I had genuinely begun wondering if she was purposefully picking fights with me. As she swept the living room floor, dancing to the tune of the song playing over the speakers and glancing at our photos on the wall, her feelings of love were so strong that I was truly taken aback. Immediately, I started questioning my own thoughts and wondering about whether or not I was the one who had been picking fights. I imagine I'd have started feeling a sinking feeling in my stomach, along with a hefty serving of guilt on the side. But while Alina danced and hummed in the living room, her feelings overpowered me. I know I'm not the best at saying what's on my mind or communicating, but maybe if he can come home to a nice clean house, he can at least relax after coming home from work. I know he's been working so hard lately, she thought, and I could hear and feel it reverberating throughout me. Then she set down the broom after finishing sweeping and walked into the bathroom to start cleaning the toilet. But while she was cleaning the handle, her hand accidentally slipped and a snapping sound could be heard as the chain inside broke. No. Come on, she thought, and I could feel an intense sadness take over. She didn't think it, but somehow I knew this feeling was because she didn't want to have to break the bad news to me when I came home from work, even if it was as simple as the chain in the toilet breaking. Clearly, she had been trying to do something nice for me, so I could come home and feel good, appreciated, and loved, but had accidentally broken something instead. I knew this day. I remember coming home and getting upset with her, then slamming the door as I walked outside to go buy another chain, alone. I wasn't sure if I could handle witnessing that through her eyes, knowing what I know now. It would probably break me. Thankfully, I began to feel the memory start fading to black. I gasped, feeling as if I had been punched in the gut. Quickly, I regained my bearings in the nearly dark orchard, only barely being lit by fading orange and purple twilight now. I turned and immediately began running, subconsciously throwing the apple I had just bitten, but it had already faded from existence before it ever reached the ground. Floods of emotions rushed through my veins, and they made their way out of me in the form of tears streaming down my face. Sprinting through the misty and dimly lit orchard, I could only think about getting home as quickly as possible to see my wife. I needed to hug her, hold her, kiss her, and tell her how sorry I am about everything. Maybe it'll be strange if I come home late and do this, but I wouldn't be able to handle it if I didn't. So I began thinking of what I could tell her. Should I tell her about this orchard here? I wondered to myself as I saw the old wooden gate come into view with my truck parked just outside of it. No, she'd think I'm crazy and also lost my mind after losing my job, I admonished myself as I finally reached my truck. Wait, I know. I'll grab some of the fruit and bring it back with me to show her, I thought, spinning around to run and grab some of the fruit. What the... No way! I shouted in surprise. The orchard was gone. All I could see was overgrown brush blocking the dirt path. There was no old wooden gate, no strange and mysterious orchard shrouded in mist. Nothing strange at all. Without taking the time to wrap my head around it, I turned back around to get in my truck and start driving home. Another 20 or so minutes later, I could see mine and Alina's old ranch house in the distance as I quickly sped down the bumpy dirt road leading to our home. As I got closer, I could see she was already standing on our covered porch, right next to the stairs leading down to the gravel driveway. Her arms were crossed, making me feel like she was worried or upset with me. But I brushed the worry away, just feeling happy to even see her at all. I pull up, put the truck in park, and immediately hop out, starting to run to her. "Where have you been? It's basically dark now. I've been so worried about you," she asked, clearly feeling concerned and not upset. I love you. I'm so sorry about everything. I haven't been treating you right. I see that now, and I'm gonna be better. You are my everything," I say, and then kiss her and pull her close to me. After I kiss her passionately for a few moments, I continue to hold her, and I feel her put her arms around me as she remains silent, clearly not knowing what to say. I've got so much to tell you, Alina, but I just needed you to know that I love you first, I say softly in her ear, still catching my breath. Alina held me tightly, but what I hadn't noticed were the 2 green apples she held in her hands. A wide grin spread across her face as her eyes twinkled and shined in the fading twilight. Hi, fellow dreamers. Thanks for listening and joining the Dreamy Man on his journey through this dream. Please do him a favor by liking and subscribing with that little notification bell so you'll be notified every time he falls asleep and starts dreaming again. See you next time, and may all of your dreams come true.